Hey, Federated family, it's Tuesday, April 14th, 2 days after Easter. But we're going to hear the Easter story again from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, he is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. But suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. And they came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There's a refrain that goes over and over in this Easter story, a repeated combination of events and instructions as the women venture to the tomb on the first day of the week. The angel tells them, "Do not be afraid." Then he says, "Come and see." And then he commands them, "Go and tell." Do not be afraid. Come and see. Go and tell. The women take the angel's words to heart, and they depart in a combination of fear and great joy. And they head off to Galilee to tell Jesus' disciples the good news about the empty tomb. And just when they think it couldn't get any better, it gets better. It gets exponentially better. They meet Jesus, the risen Jesus, and he greets them with the word, "Rejoice." And they see him and they worship him, and he says the same thing as the angel. Do not be afraid. Go and tell. Do not be afraid. Come and see and go and tell. We're supposed to go and tell that Jesus is alive and coming to a town near you. This is the Easter mandate not only for Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, but for all of us who've been given a glimpse of the empty tomb and an unmistakable encounter with the risen Jesus. Come and see. Do not be afraid. Go and tell. Perhaps more now than ever, we need to hear the angels and Jesus' admonishment to not be afraid. We need to know that our worst fears are replaced with more than our greatest hopes could ever imagine. Death did not have the last word. Evil did not prevail. Suffering will not last forever. All the things we think are irreversible or inevitable, God has upended. Every assumption about the horrors we witness, God counters with irrefutable and life-giving action. For the tomb is empty, and we can rejoice because Jesus lives. We do not need to be afraid. We see and know that God's promises are fulfilled, that God's word is trustworthy. Remember what Jesus told us. Do not be afraid. Look and see what God has done, and go and tell others all about it. Can we do it? Can we, like Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, take these words to heart and in joy and in fear, enact them in our community? Right now, there's an awful lot of things to be afraid of. Our economic situation, both personal and global, the health of the vulnerable in our households and our community, the state of our hospitals and the stress of our healthcare workers, the many unknowns of this virus and what it will force us to change and endure. Like Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, suffering and death, the pain of those we hold dear, these are all the things that we think about. We see the headlines. We know the names and faces and families of people impacted. We grieve the loss of normalcy, ritual, human company, social gatherings, in-person worship, the lack of a simple hug. We mourn all that we've sacrificed to this pandemic, and we're afraid of what might be lurking around the corner in the days to come. So if we ever need to hear a "do not be afraid" message, it's now. Can we take the angel and the Son of God at their word for just a breath, for a heartbeat, for a moment? Can we let the possibility of joy mingle with our palpable sorrow just long enough to remember that the stone is rolled away, that the tomb is empty? Can we see that the body we came to tend is instead alive again and right in front of us and telling us that there is reason to rejoice? Even as we reel from violence and terror, from suffering and death, can we recognize that Jesus is risen and among us and worships with us? Easter is here, and Christ is risen, and the stay-at-home order persists, and the virus still spreads, and the death toll goes up, and there's no denying that our minds dwell in the depths of Holy Saturday despair. And yet, the grave couldn't hold Jesus. When Jesus said from the cross, "It is finished," it's because his work of salvation and redemption was completed. But his story and our story is far from over. And so I think this is an Easter season when we desperately need to hear from heavenly messengers and from the risen Christ, "Do not be afraid. For Christ is risen, and he is here, and he knows what it is to suffer, and he will not let us be alone in our pain." For the tomb is empty and the victory is won, even in places where the sick still need healing, and those who are oppressed still yearn for justice, and the captives are not yet free. But Jesus says to remember what we've been taught and told, to remember what we've seen and experienced, to remember all the worst that we thought we knew, and that it got upended and overturned by the one who promised to be with us always, even to the end of the age. Jesus is the one who promises the peace that passes all understanding. And he is the one in this passage who tells us to go and to tell all those who have yet to hear the good news that Jesus is risen and that the resurrection cannot be stopped by anything. Blessings, my friends. Be safe, and I'll see you soon.